Hapaday, and thank you, Jonas. Thanks for everyone being here for this 37th installment of the Presidential Lecture Series. I'm so delighted that we get to begin with Father Hezel. So Francis and I'll just introduce him for you, and then he'll be presenting the film and then having a presentation of his own on the film. Francis X. Hezel, Society of Jesus, is a Jesuit priest who has lived and worked in Micronesia since 1963. At different times, he has served as a high school teacher, school administrator, pastor, and regional superior of the Jesuits in Micronesia. He spent 30 years directing the Micronesian Seminar, which is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization based in Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia. Father Fran has written and spoken widely about social change and its impact on island societies. He has also written several books on Micronesian history, including The First Taint of Civilization, Strangers in Their Own Land, and The New Shape of Old Island Cultures. His most recent book, Making Sense of Micronesia, The Logic of Pacific Island Culture, was written to help newcomers appreciate some of the basics of Micronesian culture. He has produced over 70 video documentaries for local broadcast, including a 7-hour series on the history of Micronesia. Father Fran was active in writing for the Guam Recorder magazine, published by the Micronesian Area Research Center in the 1970s, and he has been a lecturer within our own Micronesian Studies graduate program. In 1986, the University of Guam presented him with an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree in recognition of his contribution to Pacific scholarship and his service to all of Micronesia. He received a second honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree from his alma mater, Fordham University, in 1994. Currently, Father Fran is working at Santa Barbara Parish in Dededo, where he also assists migrants from the Federated States of Micronesia. He continues to provide assistance to the islands as opportunities present themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, Father Francis X. Hezel.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for taking the time and trouble to come and attend this presentation this evening. I don't have much to say about it. I'd rather let you see it for yourself. But by way of introduction, I'd like to say that I'm a person who's not a historian, but a person who's always curious about the absences of things, the absences of information where there should be. And so when I came to Guam, when I asked people, before the latte stones, what was there? Where did people come from? I'd get these funny looks and scratching of the head. And people would say, well, I don't know, we never covered that. But I understood that there was some interest in that here, that Dr. Mike Carson, the archaeologist, had been working on this same question for years. So we decided, as always, to take what researchers were doing and try to put it together in a reasonably presentable way that could move along public education. And that was the attempt of this video, to provide information on a period of time that's maybe unrecognized, or at least a period of time that people will shrug their shoulders about and say, we didn't get that in school. So here is that piece. It's about 45 minutes, the video presentation. But I hope that we can discuss some of the points brought up in it afterwards. And I could perhaps address questions that you have, or maybe we could engage in some bit of a conversation on this. So here is the video.
Long before the first laddie stones were fashioned, just 1,000 years ago, an early, mysterious group of people had settled in the Marianas about 1500 BC.
Sea gypsies.
Sea nomads. These are Austronesian-speaking people that are sailing all over Southeast Asia.
At that time, 3,500 years ago, no one else lived out in the remote Pacific. It was only in the Mariana Islands that we find a few sites.
The Marianas were inhabited initially, first out of all of Micronesia.
Where did these settlers come from?
And so you've got, okay. So you've got Neanderthal. Could I have the next one? Lele Koshrai, you know, these stone things were built. This is about 1200. Neanderthal began around 900 or so AD. Next one. There's your Easter Island. Those are famous. Rapa Nui statues. That was about the same time. Next one. And those are the monoliths in Palau. Now, all these things are happening around 1000 AD or so. So is there some kind of renaissance that's going on throughout the Pacific? Or is it a space invader, as somebody actually suggested about 25 years ago and wrote something on it? I'd like to think that it was global warming, because I think that there was a global warming that corresponded generally to that time period. Not the global warming itself, but as I say, the Renaissance that possibly accompanied it. Possibly the fact that there was a new sort of vision in the Pacific, and places with basaltic rock took advantage of them to create monuments, not just spiritual monuments, but monuments that attested to the status, as the latte stones seem to have done here in the Marianas. Could you go back to those? Now, history goes way back before that. It does every place in the Pacific. What this video was supposed to show was that of all of remote Oceania, the Marianas was settled first. What this means is that in 1500 or so, and we'll show a slide or so later on, but there's your settlement here. That's your area here that we're talking about. Indonesia, you see the island with the limbs extended, where the A is in Indonesia? That's Sulawesi. At least I think it's Sulawesi. And it is below, just below the Philippines. And you can see where the Marianas are positioned. I think we all understand that the original impetus or thrust for the settlement of Oceania came out of Taiwan. There are still tribal peoples in southern Taiwan today, and these people are ancestral. If you were to go to Taipei and walk into any museum, you would see things that remind you a lot of what you might find in Yap and Ponape and Palau and places possibly here once upon a time. According to the, could I have the next slide, please? Let me see, no, that's, I should say one other thing, that there was, give me the, next one. Once upon a time, there was a land bridge. Now the land bridge predates this by a good bit. Because of this land bridge, this would have been during the Ice Age, when the water level was lower. You could practically walk from China through what is now Indonesia and do dugout canoe trips, you know, through these little islands here until you get to Papua New Guinea. And Papua New Guinea is that big thing over in the upper right corner there. So that people were coming as early as 30,000, 35,000 BC. This is well before the Austronesian migration began. This is the earliest settlement the Pacific. But they don't count Papua New Guinea. That's why we say the Pacific, the remote Pacific, because they don't count those places that were that would have been covered by the land bridge, accessible by the land bridge. Those people who came over 30,000 years ago are the people whose descendants still inhabit parts of Papua New Guinea, and they account for the non-Austronesian languages in that place, 700 or so of them, making the Pacific Islands the richest place in linguistic diversity in the world. Okay. These are the Batanes Islands. And so when we talk about migration, we talk about southern Taiwan. Now remember, we're talking about Taiwan at a time, maybe 4,000 years BC. We're talking about an island that was settled by a group of people who might have come down the Yangtze River. This is pre-Han China. Chinese is not yet spoken. Rice is not yet cultivated. The grain at that time is millet. They're coming into Taiwan, settling there, the Aborigines, coming down to the south, settling in the south for some reason or other, and about 1,000 years or 1,500 years later are beginning the out-migration that leads them to settle Oceania. Because everybody in Oceania, aside from the people that we've described who walked across during land bridge times, are really related to Taiwan. And that's why even to today, Taiwan has, shall we say, a political or cultural agenda in insisting that Taiwanese, rightly, are cousins to the people of the Pacific. So these people would have begun about 3000 BC or 2500 BC, moving down what we call the Batanes Islands, the islands between southern Taiwan and the northern part of the Philippines, moving into Luzon, and from Luzon into other parts of the Visayas, and down, of course, into Indonesia. This video assumes this. Our video is asking, so what happens then? Where did these people go from at that point? Whoops, those are the burial sites, but that's not from the Marianas here. That's, I think, from Taiwan. Do we have the other recorder working? Okay, so. The point of it, though, was not only to explore this period of time between 1500 BC, in other words, 3,500 years ago, the period of time, that lost period of time here, the time it's not really accounted for, but it was also to give people a little bit of an understanding of who these people were who came in to settle, where they might have come from. Evidence is mounting on the source for this migration and the kind of what we know about their lifestyle. You already got a hint of that and what you could understand previously. The lifestyle was basically settled on coastal communities and at a time when the houses were built on stilts and caves were still being used as community centers, not for burial, but for community centers. Where did people bury their people? The deceased? Certainly not in the caves. And the truth is that we can't find burial sites. The earliest burial sites I think that they have for the Marianas are something like, about 500, 300 BC. So it is towards the end of this period, but nothing really older than that. The remains we have from earlier sites, midden sites I guess they're called, are tools and bits of pottery and ceremonial objects, things like that. Interestingly enough, we do not have weapons that were found at that time. Does this mean everybody lived together in peace and love? Maybe not. But maybe it simply means that the weapons were made out of wood, and they just disappeared after that. They went back to nature. But there's certainly no sling stones or anything of that sort that we can identify as weapons. We're now talking about the time of Christ, or a couple hundred years after the time of Christ, at the time that they got these bodies. We also found that, as they said, they did some cave decoration. There wasn't any tattooing that we know of at that time. Of course, you don't find flesh, at that time. But there didn't seem to be any tattooing instruments at that time. There wasn't any tradition of it. And so what we have is the early settlers who were kind of slight in bodily form that were either supplanted or eventually evolved into more of the population that we associate with the Latte period around 1000 AD. How this happened, we're not sure. Actually, there's a good bit of work that still needs to be done on the Latte period, on the early Latte period especially. And on when Latte stones stopped being built, my feeling is that the Latte stones themselves stopped being built well before the Spaniards came onto the island. That was true in other places in the Pacific as well. So that's what we have for you. I'm sorry that the showing didn't go better than this, but I'd like to invite you to, if you have any questions or any comments that you want to make on this, fine.
We have microphones on each side, so if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand. We'll get you a microphone.
I'm just curious, how much more of the video were we not able to see? Like, are we already at maybe 15 minutes left of the video?
Yeah, there's, I think about 10 minutes or so.
10 minutes.
I think what we did not see was there was a very quick recounting of the Latte period, the differences between Latte period. Somebody mentioned what I mentioned, body form. The later people were stockier and bigger boned than the early people. The early people were, somebody put it, gracile. That was the term that they used. But yes, that, and in the recap of this. I should say this, by the way, and as far as the destination, where they came from, there's been for a long time now, there's been two schools, the people who favor Java, or if not Java, some part of Indonesia, or the people who favor the Philippines. And as this video pointed out, evidence is beginning to move strongly in the direction of Luzon. If you want language proximities, it's Ilocano. Ilocano even more than Tagalog for as far as language closeness. Although there is a great deal that we don't know about the linkages of the languages even in the Philippines. But there's no doubt about the fact that Chamorro is one of the oldest languages in the Austronesian family, along with the basic Filipino languages. I'm sorry, Albert.
Yes, I just wanted to ask you, Father Fran, if you could explain to us what are the advantages of using mitochondrial DNA rather than the Y chromosome DNA, tracing the mother line rather than the father line?
Yeah, I think you know a lot more about it than I do. I was told that mitochondrial dealt with women. Is that right? It traces a woman, and since we're in a matrilineal society. And since the men were seafarers and could end up any place, but the women generally weren't, there's a sense of stability in the mitochondrial side, I think. In other words, tracing women's DNA. At least that was you probably could add a lot more to that yourself. Okay, thanks.
I wonder if there's any evidence of after the first migration here, was there any evidence of movement in the region or from here to Palau or to Micronesia or any other movement?
I don't think so. I think there was more evidence of people coming from Micronesia up to Guam. And I think for trading purposes, we can trace that from about the 1600s on. Earlier than that, it's harder to say. But generally speaking, now remember, when a group of people have navigation on a big island, they generally lose it within 100 years. That's the rule. I mean, it's pretty much standard. But not in the Marianas. The Marianas, as you know, you got your, what is it called, Sakman and Galaiti, the two kinds of canoes. But in the Marianas, because of the distance between the high islands and the Marianas, not to mention Ghani, you had this long distance traveling that was maintained much longer than you would in Yap proper or in Palau or in the islands Chuk or Ponape. So that was one of the distinctive features here, culture.
So, Father, I just wonder what interactions were there between the folks up in Achugao to the folks with the folks down in Chalampio, for example, because that's about a 10-mile stretch probably between the two. So the settlements, how much interaction were happening between them?
Well, we don't know. We don't know a lot about this thing. You know, this is a problem with putting together something like this. You get these sketchy little details, and sometimes you look at these things and you say, so what? You know, tell us about the important things, not just about what they ate. You know, how did they live? Did they have dances? Did they men's houses or anything like that? But those are the kinds of things that we don't know. We don't know whether they traveled a lot. But we guess that in a place like Saipan, where you've got 3 prominent settlements, that there had to be interaction, you know, between the people of those settlements for marriage purposes. Because Peter Bellwood, the person you just saw on the screen, the Brit, says pretty clearly that he thinks that there was continual migration. In other words, once the people from Luzon or wherever they came from found the way, that was the sailing directions. Remember, they went back to their homeland, got other people, and brought them. So there's this back and forth process that's going on, not just in the initial settlement, but throughout that whole period of time. That's what Bellwood reminds us, and Mike Carson maybe a little less so in his interventions.
Okay. Any other questions? No?
About 30 years ago, over in Matapang Beach, they were doing unearthing certain parts there, and they found a piece of a bone that's about, I guess, maybe 3 feet. What's the height of the earlier Chamorros?
The height was shorter than it is now. But the significant thing was not height. The significant thing was bone size. The bone size was much, as I mentioned before, people were much slighter of build than they would have been later on. But the height, I'm not sure. I'm getting the impression from things that I read that it was barely 5 feet, maybe 5'2", 5'3", 5'4", somewhere in that range.
Okay. If there are no other questions, how about another round of applause for Father Fran?
Okay. Thank you.